Right then, so I am wearing my hat because I'm having a bad hair day today and I thought I'd look less scruffy. Anyway, so this podcast is me chatting with a friend of mine, Michelle Butler. Now, Michelle and I, we used to work together many years ago, and it was in a creative agency. And we kind of lost touch. Michelle's husband, Pete, was instrumental in my photography career. He taught me how to use Photoshop, and that kind of changed everything for me and made me very passionate about photography, and I'm still very passionate about that. And then many years later, I was just kind of starting to dig myself out of my kind of rut that I got myself stuck into. And I was finding out about mindfulness and things like that. I thought I'd discovered this thing for myself, but then I realised it was a huge movement, and then I started to read up on it. And I'd moved out to the countryside. I was crossing the road in the middle of nowhere, and then I heard someone calling my name, and I looked up, and there in the car was Michelle Butler. And funnily enough, she had become a mindfulness practitioner, something that helped her a great deal, and something that she was passionate about and interested in. And as a result of that, we've been trying to do this podcast now for about 2 years. I've been saying I wanted to get her to talk about what mindfulness is because it's important to me, and a lot of people have different definitions of it. So this one is all about mindfulness. We get into some really interesting topics such as neuroplasticity, about kind of teaching ourselves how to rewire our brains in a way, a bit like going to the gym but for your brains. So where we get stuck into ruts, we teach our brains to be negative, we can teach them to be positive, look for opportunities, look for all the good things that are going on with our lives rather than all the bad things that are going on with our lives. And so, it's a really fascinating podcast. We could have gone on a lot longer, and I'm just so glad we managed to finally do it. I gate crashed Michelle in her kitchen, and we get chatting straight away. We talk about Michelle's experiences, then we get into the kind of nitty-gritty of mindfulness, of how she teaches young people to bring it into their lives and things like that. So here I am talking to Michelle Butler. We kind of mentioned my book in a few places, among some other books. It's still available along with all my other ones, Do the Thing, Have the Power, and also Shine Manifesto, and also Outpost. They're available on Amazon. Check them out if you get a chance. They're a little insight into what's going on in my brain, and they're probably not what you're expecting, but give them a shot anyway. And in the meantime, here is me sitting down and talking to Michelle Butler all about mindfulness. Okay, so Michelle Butler, thank you very much for being on my podcast.
My pleasure.
We've probably spent about a year trying to organise this. We started it a few weeks ago, and then we got interrupted by the window cleaner, and the man came to clean the gutters, and then we just ran out of time, and it has been quite stressful sorting it out. But I've managed to gate crash your house this time, and we're finally doing it. And the reason I wanted to get you on the podcast is because you're a mindfulness practitioner. I suppose that's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
And we used to work together many years ago, and then I was crossing the road one day. I just moved out to the country, and I was crossing the road, and suddenly you appeared after, 10 years?
Yes, it was most bizarre.
Yeah, and I just moved to this random little village in the middle of nowhere, and there you were. And our paths sort of crossed, but they diverged in terms of mindfulness as well.
Absolutely.
And I've been wanting to do something about mindfulness on the podcast for ages. Mm-hmm. So it seemed perfect to get you to chat to me.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, no, I'm just so glad that you're up for it. So for anyone who doesn't know what mindfulness is, how do you describe it to people?
I always struggle with a
I think
neat definition.
Everyone has different definitions, don't they?
They do. The most well-known definition is the John Kabat-Zinn definition, who is a well-known practitioner, teacher in the mindfulness world. And he describes it as be thinking in a certain way with awareness and without judgment.
Okay.
So I think I've got that slightly wrong, and it'll probably the exact terminology will come to me later, the exact quote will come to me later, but it's basically mindfulness for me is the opposite of mindlessness.
Okay.
So if you are going through your life just not ever being aware of your surroundings, locked in your thoughts, locked in your head, you're not being mindful. Mindful is about bringing awareness to what's going on in your mind and in your body.
So, like, mindfulness is huge for me. It's very important for you and for millions of people around the world. But there are a lot of people who will never hear about it, will kind of dismiss it as kind of spiritual nonsense, and will seem to get on fine without it. Why do you think it's so important for some people, yet other people just seem to kind of carry on?
Well,
regardless?
I think, life is very stressful for a lot of people these days. I can only speak for myself. I came to it having known nothing about it in 2014.
So you actually wrote about it. You did a guest blog post on
I did.
my blog. So what's your story? There was an incident, wasn't there, that led you to kind of anxiety and some struggles with that?
Absolutely. I think I'd probably been struggling with anxiety for a time, and because of the mindlessness, I hadn't really noticed it. I hadn't had an awareness of what was going on. I just was, as one does, just sort of carrying on with life and sort of pushing it aside. And there was an incident in August 13, which is really was really not the trigger point, but the point where I thought this kind of isn't normal.
Yeah.
And I was living up in Surrey, and we had a celebration, and we let off some Chinese lanterns with my family who were down from Yorkshire in the garden. And they came down, and to me, they still looked alight.
Oh, so you saw them coming.
I saw them
so these
coming
things went
down.
up.
They went up.
So they're the things that you kind of, they're made out of paper.
Absolutely.
You light the middle of them and they float up.
And they float up.
And then they come back down.
And they come back down, obviously not lit.
Yeah.
So one came down in next door's garden and landed in their bin, alight.
Oh, so it was a light.
It was a light.
Okay, yeah.
And we put that out. And then the other one, we didn't see where it went, and one landed in the woods. And I spent the whole evening panicking about it, to the point where I made my sister climb through brambles and thorn bushes up in a private woodland space.
And was she kind of just doing it to humour you, basically?
Yes, because she was pretty convinced that they were out when they came down, but I was convinced that they weren't.
Yeah.
And I started doing the catastrophising. I couldn't sleep that night. We found one in the woods, hadn't done any damage. We didn't find the other one.
Okay, but in your mind that was somewhere just smouldering away.
Smouldering, and I started catastrophising that what happens if the woods burn down, and then what happens if somebody's house burns down, and then what happens if that's my responsibility, and I've got, somebody dies because of it, and it really got out of hand. And I woke up the next morning, everybody had obviously forgotten about said lanterns. The first thing I did was go on the internet, and ironically, there had been in Box Hill, which is nowhere near where I am, there had been a fire for some other reason, nothing to do with the Chinese lantern. And so my immediate thought was, oh my God, that's the lantern, that's my fault. And it wasn't until I read the article I thought, I'm being ridiculous, this is miles and miles and miles away. And it was for something else. But I had got myself into such a state about it, and at that point I kind of realised that my catastrophising and my anxiety was getting out of control.
So you'd always kind of struggled with anxiety, and this was the tipping point.
I had struggled with anxiety over the years. So as a child, a teenager, I used to have panic attacks. If I had to do any public speaking, I used to get really panicky. I had a bit of a meltdown once when I had to do some reading in an English class, and it was so, obviously in those sort of formative years of your sort of teenage secondary school years, when everything's about how you look and not sticking out, and I had a bit of a meltdown, and from there on in I used to avoid public speaking wherever I could. I mean, it really did affect me in terms of anxiety.
Because it's funny, because whenever, I worked with you, it was long before the incident with the Chinese lanterns, but you always struck me as confident, in control of everything, well organised. I mean, you were an account manager at this agency we worked together at, and you were just always on the ball. Just you seem to be the only person with a calm. What's the poem like? If you can keep your head while the world around you is losing theirs, the world and everything in it is yours, my son.
No,
and you seem to be the person keeping their head and everything. So
well, it's the swan
yeah,
metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah, with the legs going like crazy underneath.
Exactly. And I think over the years, I obviously had managed to kind of find ways around that, and obviously
battle through it,
and get over elements of it as well as I got older. Fundamentally, only since I've been doing my mindfulness training or my mindfulness practice, should I say, and my teacher training, I've been able to hold sessions with people. I can talk about that later, but my techniques that I use for breathing and calming have allowed me to get over that anxiety about public speaking, which harks back to being 15 years old, and I'm 47 now.
Yeah.
So it's taken me, God knows how many years, 30 years to kind of get through that. And it informed a lot of choices I made. It informed the degree that I did, because I wanted to do marketing. I didn't do that because there was lots of presentations and things in marketing.
Isn't that funny that it actually had an influence on
everything,
your life path?
My life path, exactly. So so I'm trying to think why I got onto this subject. I had various periods of up and down anxiety, mainly under control, but at that point I'd never had a situation like that before, where it was totally irrational fear. That's the only way I can describe it. Before, my anxiety had been to do with sort of what I would call normal fears that people would have. A lot of people have fears about giving presentations in in front of their peers, but this I knew was a completely irrational fear. And
so you recognised it as, did you? For me, the big thing about mindfulness is that it allows me to separate myself from my thoughts and my feelings. So even if I'm wrapped in anxiety or having, going through a particularly low point, I can at least say I am feeling low, but those are my feelings and my thoughts. They're not me. But for years, I'd attached those to my identity. So it's like, when you had this incident with the Chinese lanterns and this panic attack, were you identifying with that feeling of, was it all consuming, or were you able to kind of step aside?
No, I wasn't able to step aside. It was all consuming. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't do anything about it straight away. That was August 2013. I didn't actually go to the doctor until February 2014. So I kind of battled on with it, with things getting, sort of building momentum and building speed.
Did anyone around you notice that things were getting out of hand?
My husband noticed, but didn't. I couldn't articulate what was going on. I felt incredibly stupid.
You're probably guilty as well. Your impact on other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I just felt embarrassed, because I thought, I don't know, this is totally irrational. The things I was getting anxious about was so irrational and nonsense. Things that I think I probably wrote about it in the blog with that I did for you on your space. I'd go over a pothole in the road and think that I'd knocked somebody over, and I would drive back round to see if I'd knocked anybody over, if there was anybody in the road. I mean, the fear was just, it was all consuming, and it got to the point where I thought, I can't actually. I was hiding it.
Tense all the time.
Tense all the time, and I was hiding it, as you said about the swan, and I said about the swan, but you said about me sort of emitting a calm demeanour. I was keeping it all together on the surface, and I didn't have a day off work. I didn't change anything that I was doing, but inside I just felt awful, just this like a coiled spring, of fear all the time. So I was really just kind of functioning at a very surface level, but underneath it was, if you could sort of peel my mind, my skull back and have a look at, and it was a visual thing. It was just swirling massive fear, basically.
So what prompted you then to go and seek help?
Well, there was no then defining moment like the Chinese lantern scenario that made me think I need to go to the doctors, but it just had gone on and on and on, and it was building to the point where I was crying a lot privately, and had discussions with my husband, and I just felt I needed to reach out. But the thing about mental health as well is there can be, certainly with me, with the anxiety, there was a paranoia about reaching out, because I thought, I've got 2 young children, what if they think I can't
Yeah,
cope?
what if you get sectioned or something and they take them off you?
Yeah, exactly. They think I can't, look after my children. So I was very reluctant to talk about it, even though I was functioning as a normal human being and sort of hiding it and covering it up, and I was, had this turmoil inside. I was still very much dealing with my daily life, but I was frightened that if I went to the doctors and told them, it was like
everything would fall apart.
It was the catastrophizing again. So I kind of put it off, and I thought, no, I have to go and do something about this, because something is wrong. Yeah. Something is wrong with me. And my doctor was fantastic. I mean, first of all, he wanted to put me on antidepressants. Well, again, anxiety, you don't want to be on any tablets. You immediately read the form, and oh my God, I'm not doing that. I did try some for about a week, but they made me feel drunk.
Which ones did
drink.
you?
I can't actually remember what the first ones were.
Sertraline?
Sertraline, could have been sertraline, but I'm not 100% sure. But I just felt drunk for a week. And
I know different people react differently to
absolutely.
So
and they did tell me to bear with it, but it just made me so anxious. I thought, I cannot take these. So I came off those, and then I had to wait, unfortunately, because of the lack of resources in the National Health Service. I had to wait for therapy, a talking therapy. Now, it was brilliant that my GP didn't just put me straight on antidepressants and send me away. He actually had the foresight and the forward thinking to put me forward for a talking therapy, but that was in the February, and I didn't go on to any sort of talking therapy until the April. Yeah. So I kind of had 3 months, February, March, 3 months of just awful
writhing around in kind
situation,
of
just trying to cope, not knowing how to cope. And then I started my MBCT course, which is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy.
So was this before you'd had the talking therapies?
This was the talking therapy.
Oh, right. So this was the...
Yeah, this was it. So I went to see a guy called Tom, who I will be forever grateful to.
And he was an NHS practitioner?
He was an NHS therapist. Yeah. And we went through an 8-week program. And in fact, I was given a 6-week window of time with him initially. And I ended up staying with him for about 16 weeks. So I was in quite a bad way, because they do the depression scale, and I was off the scale.
So they can actually
with depression. Yes,
so they can measure this.
I was off the scale with depression. I was off the scale with anxiety, and I wrote the figures down. I should have actually brought them with me, but I had the before and after figures for when I started in April and when I ended in November, and the change and the difference was huge, for the better, obviously.
And this is just from what you were saying before, being aware of your thinking and thinking intentionally, essentially.
Yes. Weirdly, when I first started it, because I was in such a dark place and not able to see any sort of light or, the wood for the trees, that I... we did our first session, and I'm just trying to think back. I can't remember exactly what we did, and I think it was just kind of a sort of breathing and sitting and turning our awareness to sort of our breath. And I came out of there, and my husband, Pete, sort of said, "How did it go?" And I just cried when I got out. I thought, this is just a load of rubbish.
Oh, really?
How is this going to help me?
So it just did nothing for you. You sat and you focused on your breathing.
No, because I think, if you're in a situation of stress or worry that is just kind of a normal situation of stress or worry, then, a simple breathing exercise probably could, flip you back into that state of normality, quote unquote. I wasn't in that situation. I'd been in a depressive and anxious state for months.
It's funny because I had an article in The Guardian I mentioned before about my own experiences with meditation and breathing and things like this. And literally, like, meditation for me is just sitting and breathing, and you're paying attention to your breathing. And it seems like such a tiny activity, such a kind of small, almost pointless thing, that when you are racked with these kind of huge issues and problems and whatever it might be, anxiety, sort of lack of self-esteem, whatever it is, and someone says to you to sit and breathe, you kind of think, well, really? Don't be ridiculous. That's not going to help me.
No.
I'm breathing now.
Yeah.
How is it going to help me at all? So how did you get past that kind of incredulity for
funny enough,
mindfulness thing?
Yeah. We were talking about this obviously before we started recording, that it's very easy to kind of be sort of dismissive of it because it's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
And for me, obviously doing a quick breathing exercise in an hour's session at the very start of my talking therapy was like, I don't know, taking a toothpick to Mount Everest and chipping away at the little bit of the ice at the top. It's a start, and it's a tiny hole that you make, and you do make a dent. But for where I was, it just needed an awful lot of work. And I came out of there in despair, thinking, what is this going to do for me? For that exact reason, I don't feel any different. This is not a quick fix.
Do you think that, because a lot of the people who are passionate about mindfulness or meditation or any of these kind of related practices, often they have been in a dark place and it has helped them come out because they've tried everything else.
Yes.
And that the reason they've stuck with it is because they've got nowhere else to go and nothing else
and they want to fight to get well.
So people who maybe haven't been through that kind of difficult period or period of trauma or whatever it might be might not turn to it because actually things are okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
When actually the benefits are pretty universal, whether you're mentally fit or struggling with anxiety or depression or whatever. But yeah, so I sort of digress anyway.
No,
so.
I think you are absolutely right. I think for me, I was introduced to it through the anxiety and depression, but it probably took me about 2 years to get well with constant work.
So why did you stick with it?
Because I wanted to get well, and because I knew that just taking a few pills wasn't going to...
So you had faith that this was going to help you?
I didn't have faith. I had no idea where it was going to take me. I'd never done this sort of thing before. I'd never, been depressed. Obviously, I had up and downs with anxiety over the years, but I'd never been in this space before. So I had no idea. It wasn't really faith. It was just my pure desire to fight, to be well. Yeah. And I would do whatever it took for myself, for my kids, for my family to be well. So I stuck with it because I thought, well, what have I got to lose? I'm coming here. And at one point, I think we got in sort of about 6, 7, 8 weeks in maybe. And, my husband and I were chatting and he said to me, maybe you should stop going, because I would just come home and cry and cry and cry. So I'd go and I'd be okay. And then I'd come out and I'd feel absolutely devastated again. But we kept going and we kept going with the practices. And eventually I did start to see a little bit of a shift in the mindset, in the darkness.
So what was the first thing you kind of noticed?
I can't actually pinpoint that, Chris, I'm afraid. I can't really remember. But I think it was probably the latter sort of 3/4 in, maybe, I started to notice. I think, you know, what's probably good to explain here is about neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
So and we talked about this, and it was great for me from a therapy point of view. We talked about this in my therapy for me to see the hard facts and the science behind how the brain works, rather than let's just talk about being present and not really understanding why I was doing that. So he explained to me that obviously every thought that you have, every action that you take creates a neural pathway. And obviously, if you're on a certain neural pathway where you're thinking negative thoughts, you're ruminizing, you're catastrophizing, it's like, you know, the groove in the record's going round and round and round over that scratch, and all you're doing is deepening that groove.
So essentially what you're doing is you're building neurons, and they're transmitters and receivers, and you're actually building brain cells for that particular way of thinking.
And you're strengthening those.
Yeah, and every time you go through that kind of that behavioural loop, you're strengthening it.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating because you probably know Dr. Joe Dispenza.
Yes.
And he is a brain scientist, I suppose you could call him, and he's done a lot of research into this. Because for me, mindfulness was always a spiritual thing, you know, so a thing kind of that we think about. But when you get into the actual biology of it, it supports the kind of all the woo-woo stuff is actually supported by the science. So it's not nonsense, it's not gobbledygook.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, there is a lot of kind of philosophy in it in terms of your perspective and your worldview and that sort of interpretation. But there is biology behind it as well. So when you are feeling in a dark place, up here, your brain is wired for that. And so when you're training yourself, it's almost like an athlete training for a new sport or a new discipline within their sport. You have to actually change your body, and you have to change the way you're wired up here.
Absolutely.
And that takes a long time.
It does. And my therapist called it, you know, bicep curl for the brain. And I've always stuck with that analogy because, you know, as you know, you've done running before. You don't, you know, you don't train for a marathon by just running the day before and expecting to get through a marathon.
No.
You know, you have to keep at it, build up your stamina, build up your, you know, resilience, you know, build up your strength. It's
funny though, the running analogy as well. Apparently when you're doing rhythmical exercise like running, you produce more brain cells, so you have this neurogenesis going on. And people with a higher rate of neurogenesis are generally much more upbeat and positive because you're building these positive pathways in the brain. But that, again, is a feedback loop because the stronger your neurogenesis, the more it feeds more neurogenesis.
Absolutely. So you're kind of building...
It grows exponentially. You get happier and happier, in theory anyway.
Absolutely. And I think what's good to note here is that obviously we're talking about those sort of negative neural pathways, and if you've sort of... when we were chatting about my sort of despair and why it took so long to get there, I'd been in that negative neural pathways for months and months and months, possibly going back years. So if you imagine you're in a ditch, you've created such a groove that you've got to then try and reroute those pathways to more positive ones. You've got to climb up quite a ditch to create another pathway.
And often as well, if we use that kind of ditch analogy, you're thrashing about so much, fighting this kind of like, you know, why is everything so awful? And actually you're just digging yourself deeper because you're reinforcing that neurological pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that was really empowering to me to know that obviously science hasn't always known that the brain is neuroplastic and that it's malleable and we can retrain our brain to think in different ways. So for me, and I didn't know that at the time, I'd always had an interest in meditation. I remember buying a book in my 20s when I was living up in London and trying to meditate a couple of times using a candle and thinking, oh, this is quite nice, but not really understanding or being aware of anything other than it's a nice thing to do.
So were you doing meditation at this point then? Okay.
No, apart from a couple of times with the book.
Yeah.
In my 20s, I'd not, really investigated or practiced. I I hadn't done anything along those lines. This was completely new. I didn't even know what mindfulness was. I mean, I was Googling it to find out what I was actually in for.
So these sessions you were having, they were just kind of like going to see a therapist, talking about what was troubling you, what you thought the situation was, and how did that steer you towards mindfulness then?
Because it was mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, there's an 8-week program which was written by Mark Williams, and now you're testing me, and I can't remember the other people. Somebody Segal, I think. I'm not going to embarrass myself by saying, right. But anyway, Mark Williams is the guy that does all the narration on the book. So that's why his name sticks with me. But I downloaded that book at the advice of my therapist, Tom, and he said work through the 8-week program. And basically the 8-week program, gives you the tools and techniques for the breathing exercises. Yeah. So you will start. It's a really interesting exercise that you do first in week 1, which is the raising exercise. Have you done the raising exercise?
No, what's the raising exercise?
So I've done it in my kids' classes, and it went down an absolute storm. The kids loved it.
This is a thing you do. You do mindfulness sessions for
children. Yeah. So basically, you take a raisin, or it can be anything, piece of chocolate, whatever, piece of food, and you look at it as if you have never seen that before, as if you're a baby, or as if you're an alien, or somebody who's just come across this food, this thing. They know they can eat it, they know it's not poisonous, but they don't know what it is. So you take your time to investigate it. So you rub it in your in between your fingers. You have a look at the wrinkles on it. You start with an observation exercise, and then you put it in your mouth, but you don't swallow it. So it's like rolling it around your mouth, and the feeling of that around your mouth, and how your saliva glands react to that, and how your body wants to just immediately chew and swallow, but you kind of stop your body from doing that, so that you can really savour what's going on, and be aware of all those different reactions in your body that you wouldn't notice when you were shoveling a pretz in, or a hamburger at lunchtime, or whatever.
That's a really good. I've not thought about doing that. It's a bit like the Japanese tea ceremony. It's not about the raisin, and it's not about the tea. It's about being present in this very moment.
Absolutely.
And when you talk, it's another one of those things when you talk about being in the moment, everyone's always like, oh yeah, here we go.
Yeah, it just sounds so cliche.
What does that even mean? But then when you talk about it, here you go, you've got a piece of food. What does it look like? Because the moment you're there and you're rolling it around your tongue or whatever, you're not thinking about what you're having for breakfast tomorrow. You're not thinking about the bills you've got to pay. You're in that moment.
And being totally aware. Sorry, Chris.
Well, it's just no. I mean, I'm interrupting you, but it's just amazing. All of this stuff. It's so simple, yet it has this kind of huge spiritual baggage. Quasi religious baggage that goes with it. That is massively off-putting for people. But yet it's profoundly impactful and beneficial in very practical terms, as you've experienced and as you're teaching other people. But it's amazing. I mean, so you started to do this course then?
Yeah, so I started to do the course.
Noticed the benefits quite quickly?
I was doing it every single night. And I have continued to meditate every single night since I started the course in 2014. I very, very rarely miss an evening or a day where I don't.
Do you notice it if you don't
meditate
the next day, or?
Not so much. If it's a day, not so much. But if it's a couple of days, I might start feeling a little bit edgy, where I'm kind of just a bit busy-minded. I use that time as like my download time, because as you are aware as a meditator, that you're not clearing your mind when you meditate. It's not about clearing your mind, and a lot of people get put off about meditation,
about stopping your thoughts.
Exactly, because they think, well, my mind's not clear, and I can't do it, so I'm feeling frustrated, so I'm going to stop. But it's not about clearing your mind. It's about you've mentioned awareness twice now. I've just written a blog which I haven't actually put on my website yet, but I've called it the 3A's, and I think I've called it, the 3A's are for awareness, attention, and acknowledgement.
Okay.
So I think it's that way around. I wrote it about a month ago now and haven't got around to putting it up there. And I went to the Mindful Living show yesterday, and I went to a number of talks, and awareness and attention just come up over and over again. So it's meditating in this context. I can't speak for all different, there's obviously lots of different ways to meditate, but in this context is about awareness of thoughts.
Yeah.
And it's about bringing your mind to the present so that you are turning the volume down on those thoughts.
It's funny, Gelong Thubten?
Yes, I don't know how to pronounce it.
I don't know how to pronounce it. We were talking about him beforehand.
Yes.
He's a sort of Buddhist monk. Is he Buddhist? He's a
Yes,
Buddhist.
he is, yes.
But he uses a very nice analogy where it's a bit like, he says, it's like having the front door of your house open and the back door of your house open.
Yes, he does say that.
And, your thoughts are just passing through.
Yeah.
And you're there in your house and you're just watching them go.
Yeah.
But you don't have to interact with them.
Absolutely.
Which is a really lovely way of putting it.
And there's a poem as well called The Guest House, which is read in an 8-week MBSR program, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction. So that's a slightly different program. That follows the same. I think it might be a Rumi poem. I'm not sure. Again, don't quote me on that.
Sufi philosopher, poet.
I've not done my research at all for this podcast, but it's a poem that they use on that program, and it's very much about the same. It's about, welcoming in all the thoughts, good and bad, and allowing them just to be there. It's about your interaction, your awareness and your interaction with those thoughts, rather than pushing those thoughts away. Gelong Thubten talks a lot in this book that I'm reading at the moment, A Monk's Guide to Happiness. I'm not a Buddhist.
Just hold it up for the camera. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah. What's it called?
It's called A Monk's Guide to Happiness.
Okay.
I picked this up. I didn't know anything about this guy. I picked this up in a shop in Eastbourne. It was in sort of the bucket of random books at the front, and it's been one of the best reads I've read in ages. As I say, I'm not a Buddhist, a practicing Buddhist myself, and this comes although he is a monk and a Buddhist. This is brilliant for everybody. It's not pushing any belief system,
dogma or anything like that.
No, it's just basically about meditation and about mindfulness. But I think I did underline something. Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And this is myths about meditation. So he says the amount of thoughts we have makes no difference to our meditation. It's not about clearing or blanking out the mind or going into a trance. This will simply not work and has no real value. Meditation changes our relationship with our thoughts and emotions. It is not aimed at getting rid of them. And he talks an awful lot about grasping and resisting.
Yeah.
Because the analogy is, and you've probably heard this before, you ask somebody not to think about a yellow car.
Yeah, straight away.
And they will think about a yellow car. And that's the same with our emotions. You ask yourself not to think about something. I don't want to feel angry. I don't want to feel fear. I don't want to feel a certain emotion. You try and push that down. What's going to happen? You can't.
It's really interesting.
Push it down.
Because at the beginning of this year, I said, I have a love-hate relationship with money. I love to spend it, but I hate it when I don't have any.
You're like me.
I know. And I can't seem to hold on to it for very long. And I just remember at the beginning of this year, I said to myself, right, I'm not going to stress about my debts and my money. And then proceeded to spend the first month of January, or the first month of the year, completely racked of anxiety about money and my debts. And it's like when I've got a 1-year-old daughter, and you say to her, don't eat it. And the first thing she hears is eat it. Yeah. So she starts to put it in her mouth, whatever it is that she's holding in her hand. And I suppose it's the same with us, isn't it? When you say, I'm not going to be angry. Mother Teresa said something very interesting. And she said, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact quote, but she said, rather than fighting against something, give me something to fight for, and I'll be there. And I guess it's the same with our thoughts. Rather than saying, I don't want to be depressed anymore, we should focus more on saying, I want to be happy.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings me back to when you were, going through the terrible anxiety and everything was calm on the surface. How is mindfulness different from, say, bottling it up and just like denying it and pretending it's not? How does it help you kind of relieve the pressure rather than just it all
let it turn into a pressure cooker? Well, I think we've kind of just touched on it by what we've just said about the grasping and resisting, and about mindfulness not being about clearing the mind. It's about having a relationship with the thoughts that are there. So, there's various different practices. So the sort of standard practice that any MBCT, MBSR course starts off with is using the breath as an anchor, using the body as an anchor. And the reason why we use that is because when we are in a state of focusing on our breath or on our body, we can't be focusing on those other things. So we are training our brain to come back to a central point each time. So we will be in an exercise where we're thinking about our breath, and 100%, I'm going to go out on a limb and say 100%. I don't know anybody who's done this as a novice and said, oh yes, I concentrated on my breath the whole way through. You will start to think about your shopping list, or I don't know what you're doing next, or in my case, some horrible irrational fear that I was going through at the time. But each time you're coming back, it's that bicep curl for the brain. Each time you're coming back,
isn't it? That's the powerful thing.
It's the powerful part of it. And when you come back, you unhook and you interrupt that thought pattern. So you'll go back there again and again and again. And I went back there hundreds, thousands, probably millions of times. We have 40 to 80,000 thoughts a day, I heard yesterday in a presentation. And I think, again, I am just taking this from my memory, which isn't so good these days, but I think she said, the lady who was speaking, 85 or 95% of those are a repetition of the day before. Now, you bear in mind, if you are having nothing but negative thoughts all day, every day, because you're suffering with depression, then you're going to keep repeating those over and over and
you're
over
strengthening
again.
those neural pathways.
Back to the neural pathways, and this is almost just putting a stopper on it. You're interrupting it. Yes, you will go back, but you're interrupting it, and you keep doing that, and you keep doing that, and you keep doing that. But then you add other things into the mix. Something that you have talked about in your books, particularly in your Do the Thing, Have the Power, about gratitude and journaling and positive mindset. You add things like that into the mix, where you're not only just interrupting those thoughts, but you're training your brain to focus on something that isn't negative. So there are other techniques that you build in to that, but the initial technique is obviously just training your mind to unhook from and interrupt that thought pattern that is not serving you.
Yeah, and that's an interesting phrase you've used there, because so many things are popping into my mind all the time when you're talking. There's this kind of notion, and this is when, and I remember this when I was so bitter and angry that life was so unfair and I wasn't getting my rewards because I'd worked so hard. If you do the same thing all the time, you're going to get the same outcomes. And so you start believing that you're powerless to change because you keep thinking something's got to give, something's got to give, something's got to give, and nothing's going to give.
Somebody's going to give me a break.
Exactly. When's my big break? When's my big break? But the thing is, you're not changing anything. You're still in that set, and whether it's your thought patterns, whether it's your daily routine, whether it's the conversations you're having with people, if it's the same all the time, if you're constantly complaining about how miserable your life is, how unlucky you are, then today is going to be the same as it was yesterday, and tomorrow, and so on. And you're working those muscles in a certain way.
Absolutely.
It's becoming increasingly negative. But you were talking about, the thoughts that don't serve you. And I remember there's a chap called Bob Proctor. He's one of these kind of very influential American and therefore very cheesy.
Did he do the Rhonda?
He was in The Secret.
The Secret.
Yeah, but some of what he was saying is it's not that kind of. The Secret is very kind of. I hate to use the phrase woo-woo. I wish there was a better phrase to use, but The Secret is borderline kind of mysticism and magic.
Yeah.
But he actually, one of the things he used to say, and I used to say it over and over again in my head, and I was going through a difficult time, and I was trying to get out of these kinds of thought processes. But he was saying, only give energy to the thoughts that serve you, and that's the thing. You keep giving these thoughts this energy, and they keep doing the same thing, and you're digging this rut, like you say. And I remember being in the shower one day, and I was overwhelmed by thoughts about all the mistakes I'd made in the past, having made the wrong decisions at school, having not kind of applied myself more, and why was I such a loser, and all these terrible things. And then I just kind of said, I don't want to have these thoughts anymore, and they stopped. Well, they didn't stop, but suddenly I interrupted that thought process. And that was when a kind of light went on for me, where I kind of said, well, I don't actually have to listen to these thoughts. They're going to go on and on, but I don't have to listen. And suddenly, as I stopped giving them my attention and the energy of my attention, the volume did turn down on them a little bit, and they kind of went into the background a little bit, which was quite... Well, that was a bit of an epiphany for
profound,
me. Yeah, absolutely. And that led me into meditation and to other things like that. I can't think what we were talking about there. We're talking about changing your behaviours and your patterns.
Well, I think you've picked up on two things there. One is thoughts are not facts.
Yeah.
What we tell ourselves is not necessarily the truth.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm stupid, I'm this, I'm that, too fat, too ugly, too, haven't got a good enough job, whatever, whatever that might be, that's your perception of yourself.
And of course, every time you say that, you're reinforcing it. And
Absolutely.
So you believe it more and more and more.
The other part of that is obviously when we are stressed, they're going back to the science of it, because I do love the science of it as well as I do love the woo-woo too.
Yeah.
I like my crystals and things, and I do like all that. But for me, it's the thing that helped me the most was the science behind it, and knowing it had some sort of physical evidence that I could cling to, and it would help me. Is that by doing simple breathing exercises, by doing the coming back to the present, by that sort of constant mindful awareness, we can shift physical changes in our body. Obviously, when we are in a state of stress, our bodies are reacting, and I know you know this, Chris, but for the podcast I'll explain, but our bodies are in a state of high alert.
Yeah.
So our bodies will react in the same way to stress for a deadline at work, or worrying about money, or whatever that might be, as it would for running away from a woolly mammoth, when we were cavemen, because the brain has a negative bias. It searches for danger. That's how we've survived. It doesn't search for happiness and joy. It searches for danger, because when we were obviously years back, we were in danger constantly of being eaten, or killed by the neighbouring tribe, or eat the wrong berry and be poisoned or whatever. So we were in that state of high alert. But the difference being that you'd get chased by the saber-toothed tiger, that danger would pass, and you would then revert back to a normal state of low alert, no alert, not low alert. But when you're in a state of anxiety or worry, and one replaces the other, replaces the other, replaces the other, you are constantly, your body is physically constantly in that state of high alert.
And this can lead to actual illnesses and physical problems. I mean, I know I've had stomach issues, other people get back issues, headaches, things like this, just from these kind of emotional and intellectual processes that are
So
going
physical illness is
Yeah.
not just, obviously the mind and body, we've always seemed to treat the mind and body separately in the West. You know, luckily now we are seeing that there is a symbiosis between, you know,
Yeah.
mind and body. And, you know, what's going on in the mind does affect the body. I was reading yesterday in an article about this constant level of stress, because obviously it releases cortisol and adrenaline, because they were the things that you needed to, you know, to run or to fight, or, you know, the blood goes to certain organs to help your legs pump quicker to run, and
absolutely.
your breathing quickens and your lungs expand so that you can get more air in.
And also your blood is moved away from your stomach.
Absolutely.
And they talk about your stomach as your second brain.
Yes.
It's so densely packed with nerves and neurons and all of this kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
That it harms you emotionally as well when you're
So if
you've
got those adrenaline, cortisol running around if you're in sort of low level anxiety the whole time, and you've got those hormones and chemicals running around your body all the time, then obviously that is going to have a negative impact.
Yeah.
So in terms of what you can physically do with mindfulness exercises and breathing exercises and meditation, is that helps you to shift.
Yeah.
The breathing alone can just, if you're, and we've probably all experienced this before we're doing something that we're nervous about, an exam, a driving test, a presentation, whatever it is that makes you nervous, you know, where people say take some deep breaths, you know, and
count to 10.
And
I remember
count
at
to
school
10.
they used to say, like, deep breaths, count to 10.
Yeah,
Next time you feel like thumping the other kid in school or something.
Absolutely. It's nothing. That's nothing. This is nothing new. It's just been repackaged in a different way, in a more accessible way and a deeper way, I suppose, rather than just take a few deep breaths and off you go. It's sort of much more. You know, it's explained a lot more now, and there's a lot more around it. But in terms of, you know, switching you from that state of high alert to normal, quote unquote, it can be as simple as just closing your eyes, grounding your feet on the floor, taking a few deep breaths in and a few deep breaths out, and that immediately your brain will say, we're okay. We're okay. We can back off now. And our sort of prefrontal cortex, which is our sort of decision-making, high-thinking part of the brain, will kick back in. Whereas when we're in that state of high alert, our amygdala, which is the oldest part of the brain, will just be firing off and just shutting everything else down, saying, don't think about that, don't recall those memories, we need to just run, we need to just fight, you know. So everything, which is why sometimes when you're in that in a real state of panic, that you can't think straight, which is like going back to they can't see the wood for the trees.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are times, I know when I get stressed, actually I feel like my eyes are starting to roll back in my eye sockets, you know, my eyeballs are rolling back, and I kind of can't, my vision goes like this, and I really feel like something is holding onto me in my chest. I feel like I'm suffocating sometimes. And I'm not at all, but it's just,
that's your body preparing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh said, you know, even a single breath can be a meditation. And sometimes when I'm, you know, a lot of the time when you're feeling angry towards someone else, it's not actually because of something they've done. It's your response to what they've done. And so they're not responsible for how you feel inside. And sometimes I just find myself, if I'm tired or if I'm grumpy or I've had a bad day at work, and then there's that final straw that someone else does something and I respond badly, or I'm about to respond badly. I just take a breath and just let it go. Yeah, and then it's like, it's okay, you know, it's not their fault that I'm feeling this way. And I could turn this into a very bad situation by responding badly. And this is thousands of years old, you know, this is what, they've known it in India, they've known it, you know, the Buddha practiced it, you know, I'm sure all the other Abrahamic prophets, you know, Jesus Christ, they're probably all of a similar ilk, and some of them have been kind of turned into religions, some of them have been turned into practices, but this is not anything new.
No.
But we talk about, you know, mindfulness is this great new mainstream thing, but it's, you know, people have been doing this for 3,000 years, 4,000 years.
Absolutely, and I think when I talked about John Kabat-Zinn in the beginning of our chat, and John Kabat-Zinn devised he was a molecular biologist, I think, and he worked in the University of Massachusetts, and he developed the MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction program, based on obviously his scientific background and the fact that he was a meditator, and he pulled in the Eastern philosophies, and he pulled in his sort of science background and melded them into a secular practice that was accessible to us Westerners, to help. That program was to help people with chronic pain who had come to the end of the road with conventional medicine and just needed a way to be able to manage that pain and to live some sort of quality of life.
Yeah.
He then worked with Mark Williams and the other two
authors of that amazing book.
Who developed the MBCT program, which was more for helping people who had repetitive bouts of depression deal with obviously their mental health or the mental ill health, and then their mental health. So, we've brought these practices into the West and made them secular and packaged them up in a different way.
Yeah. So if you meditate, you're this kind of person and kind of not really connected to the real world and living in cloud cuckoo land. Whereas if you take medicines, you're much more grounded and this kind of thing.
But I think it's just made it the beauty of what they've done is made it much more acceptable. Obviously now it's within the NHS.
That's amazing.
John Kabat-Zinn has spoken in Parliament, I think, more than once.
Yeah.
And it is much more acceptable, and it as a clinical practice, and for people, and it's not just for. We've talked a lot about obviously mental ill health, and quite severe mental ill health, but as you touched on earlier on, it can be for everybody, for the wider community. And I teach kids in terms of, you just talked about it, about taking the pause, about building sort of an emotional response to not emotional resilience, but it is partly about emotional resilience, but having kind of a way of self-regulating emotions in a positive way. So that I don't teach children because they've got mental health issues. I just teach children as a way of being and a way of life, that they become more aware of their emotions. They're much more emotionally intelligent.
But also you've talked on things like it helps decision making. They become much more capable of making the right life choices and better in exams, for example, or knowing when. I remember doing exams and getting really frustrated and kind of angry that I couldn't, the answer's there, it's in my head, but I can't get it out. But if I'd been able to remain calm, and I've known people who go to pieces in exams.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you can remain calm, then that affects your future outcomes, and it's not just about dealing with depression. It's
not about dealing with depression or, obviously mental health is on the rise. I'm actually doing a course at the moment about mental health with young people and children, and it has been on the rise. But there are. I teach really simple techniques. For younger children, for example, there's a breathing technique that they can do where it's called Take 5, where you just literally put your hand up in the air, you take your finger to your thumb, and you just breathe in, breathe out, breathe in. Slower than this. I'm quickening this up for the podcast. To the other side and back again. For older children, it's teenagers maybe in an exam. They don't want to be doing, putting their hand up in the middle of an exam and breathing, but they can, under their desk, make a fist, point one finger out, breathe in, breathe out, next finger, breathe in, breathe out. And these are just going back to that, shifting us from that state of panic, that state of high alert, into a calmer state of being. So there are lots of simple little tips and techniques that we can teach our children, and not because they've got mental health problems, just because we want to teach them to be more, to be able to self-soothe, to be more emotionally, to be able to sort of regulate their emotions better, to have more agency over them, their own emotions.
Absolutely, and it's not that you do these things and suddenly life is amazing.
No.
Because life is still hard, life is life. But you're just much more equipped to, tackle the obstacles as they come along. And, certainly in the past, I would come up against one of life's obstacles and it would just knock me down straight away. And I'd be like, oh, what's the point? Oh, life is just too hard.
Yeah.
But actually now I am more self-aware and I have this practice. I can say, okay, like I've had a run of bad luck with cars recently, and it's been going on for like a couple of years now. I seem to, get really unlucky. And if that, a few years ago, it would have been, I am unlucky with cars, almost like I'm cursed, and it's not fair, and I'm unlucky. But I've just had bad luck with cars. Maybe I'm not very good at having them serviced regularly or something like that.
Who does?
Not looking for potholes in the road or something like that. But it's just it gives you the tools to just manage better, I think.
And I think it gives you the tools post having any outbursts or woe is me or, life's hard or whatever, because we're all human. And I think, sometimes I feel a little bit of a pressure of being a mindfulness practitioner, that I never lose my temper, that if somebody says something to upset me, that I'm immediately, oh, that's okay, I hold nothing but love for you, that I don't get angry or I don't get, frustrated or, whatever that may be. But, I do. And, in the past and still now, I can be really hard on myself.
Yeah.
I've just, got cross about something. I'm
supposed to be guilty about it.
I'm supposed to be a mindfulness practitioner. I feel guilty about it. I should have handled my feelings better. So post having those outbursts, obviously, if you don't get to that point, great. But post having those outbursts, it's about how you speak to yourself afterwards as well. What you learn from that, the awareness that you've got, that you've been that way, and okay, well, I'm not going to carry that on now. I'm not going to get more and more and more angry, or I'm not going to beat myself up about that. That has happened. I learn from that. I move on from that.
Yeah, and I suppose it's, it's not just something you are, it's something you do, isn't it? It's like being a vegetarian. You're only a vegetarian when you're not eating meat, and so every time a meal comes, if you eat a vegetarian meal, then in that moment you're a vegetarian. And it's the same with mindfulness. It's not just I've meditated and now I'm
Zen.
I'm a Zen person forevermore. And the same with the gym. You don't go to the gym once and suddenly you've got a six pack and you're looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger forever. It's a lifestyle, and it's a kind of approach to living.
And a constant work in progress. I think that's what, people, nowadays, because everything is so accessible, want a quick fix to everything. And this isn't a quick fix. This is an ongoing process. I've been meditating, practicing mindfulness, writing about mindfulness, learning about mindfulness, talking about mindfulness for 6 years. I would not say I'm a mindfulness expert, because I read something, and it might have been in the book that we've just been talking about. It was something about a 90-year-old meditator was asked why at his age he keeps meditating. And he said, because I think I'm just getting the hang of it.
Yeah.
It is a constant work in progress, and and there are days where it's easier than others, and there are days where you feel that you haven't been that mindful, or you have lost your temper, or you have got frustrated or stressed or whatever. And that's about how you speak to yourself afterwards, and how you draw the line under that, and don't hold on to that. We're back to that grasping and resisting again. Yeah,
it's funny, because one of the things I always kind of say that is the things that we're holding on to are the things that hold on to us.
Yes.
So we hold on, we're so angry. And actually you don't need to be angry. You can let it go. A metaphor I use all the time is it's a bit like you're holding this dove and you won't let it go. And I call it the black dove metaphor. And this bird is pecking at you and you're like, oh God, I wish it would stop pecking at me, and it's really hurting my hands. all you have to do is let it go.
Brilliant.
Because all it wants is to be let go.
Free.
And it's the same, like forgiveness. Forgiveness is not about letting the other person off the hook. It's about letting yourself off the hook and saying, I've suffered enough, and I can forgive life. I can forgive. And actually, this is something I'm doing for me, because I don't want to suffer anymore.
I think that's why people don't let go, because they think it's giving other people a free pass, because you have this sense of righteousness that I was in the right and they've hurt me, and I can't forgive because they're not going to apologise. It's sometimes people, you're not going to get the closure that you want on certain situations in life.
But we extend that to life in general. It's like, I've not had a fair crack of the whip. I've not had my rewards for all the hard work I've put in. I've not had... It's like I do my little videos every day, and I did one yesterday, and it was, sometimes we have to stop the search for happiness just to spend a few minutes and be happy, and it's like...
Oh yes, I replied to that, because I was on the train to the Mindful Living show, and the sun was shining, the birds were singing,
it happens to be
I was in my happy place. I was like, I'm really happy today, and
cool.
I'm going to celebrate it.
Yeah, why not? Absolutely. Because, and again, it's about being in the moment. We can be pushing forwards constantly for the better life and for the rewards. But when we stop to be mindful of where we are and, taste the raisin and feel its textures, and actually you start to look around and you think, actually, I'm pretty lucky where I am now. I've got a roof over my head. It may not be the big mansion that I've been pushing for, but I'm blessed in so many ways. And then the thing that we're choking about, not having a good enough car or not having all the riches, actually we start to feel pretty wealthy. And then we attract those things into our lives anyway, because we're not thrashing around, not resisting anymore.
Absolutely. And I think, it sounds a cliche, but, I constantly remind myself of this, is that the only place we can be is now.
Yeah.
We can't be anywhere else. So, catastrophizing about the future or ruminating about the past, it's wasted energy.
Absolutely.
And I know it's easier said than done, because when you are in that space, I've been in that space, I know, and I still do go into that space from time to time. Mindfulness has given me the tools to help me move away from that space, but it's very easy for me to sit here saying, well, it's not easy for me to sit here saying these things, because I've kind of lived it and worked at it, but, we can't be anywhere else but where we are. We only have agency over ourselves. We don't have agency over anybody else. There's certain things in life we can control.
Yeah.
Our eating habits, our spending habits, things tangible things that we control. There are certain things that we can't control, which we do have to let go. We you and I can't sit here and solve the climate issues, but we can do our little bit in our space.
Well, exactly.
And if everybody does that little bit in their space, then we're all coming together as a community to do, a big thing in a bigger space, So it's really just about sort of getting your head around what you can, having what you can do and what you have to let go.
But it's interesting, because I said something the other day. It's about I saw some people, some quite morbidly obese people on a bench, smoking cigarettes, can of sugary drink, doing lottery scratch cards, and people are, I'm a little bit overweight. People are overweight for all kinds of reasons.
I'm not nodding.
Yeah, no, I'm really trying to be
nodding with the conversation.
But I'm trying to be really careful not to kind of shame people about kind of their weight or anything like that. But it's, when we give up our power to all of these external things that actually we have no control over. I can buy 1,000 lottery tickets, but I still have no control over one of those, whether one of those is going to be a winning lottery ticket. But what I can do is I can take more responsibility for my finances, and I can take more responsibility for what I eat and what I put into myself, what I read, and there is this sort of certain kind of life is unfair. I'm ill. I haven't received the proper health care. It's like people like me don't get opportunities like that. Whereas I know people who, if you follow that way of thinking, they would have never had any opportunities, but they've gone out there and they've made the change happen for themselves. And it's about being aware, in here, actually, yes, in this moment, I can choose to do something. Someone said, a chap called James Clear, he said, that every action we take is a vote towards the future person we're going to be.
That's brilliant.
And it's true. It's like in this moment, if I'm mindfully, if you're watching TV and you're thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow and you're guzzling down your dinner, and then you go back for another portion. That's not being mindful about who you are. But if you're there with that raisin and you're tasting it and you're being in the moment, and you get to choose kind of whether I have another raisin, whether I have another 10 packets of raisins.
Yes.
And that is a vote for who you're going to be tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And the more, I'm being really a terrible podcast host. I'm sort of talking far too much, but
it's interesting.
I really think the more we take control over what we can control, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, the more we start to influence the things we can't control.
Yes, I
so
agree.
The luckier we get, the harder we work, the luckier we get, and that kind of thing.
And I think, that goes back to as well about taking the pause.
Yeah.
Because if you are living your life mindfully and you're bringing your awareness back to where am I now, and just pausing to breathe or just pausing to check in for a moment, that then influences the choices that you next make. It could be that you're sat in the car and somebody cuts you up.
Yeah.
And you want to, shout an expletive at them or start driving up their, their backsides or whatever, having that sort of road rage moment. Or you can take a breath and a pause and think, well, I can just choose to let this go because that's a danger to me and to everybody else on the road. And it serves me no purpose doing that, and that's just a small example, but you could do that, as you said, you can do that with anything. When you're sat making a choice about anything, you take that pause, and then it's the action that you choose to take from there.
And it takes practice.
It does.
It takes a lot of practice, and it's something you have to keep doing.
Yes.
And sometimes you don't take the pause.
No, absolutely.
But it is a practice. It's a lifestyle, and. So I'm aware of the time. We've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes so far. So I'm going to start to
round it up.
So if, say, you feel stuck, and you've been hearing a lot of people talking about this, but every time you try to do something, you think, oh, well, I would, but I haven't got the time, or I haven't got the money, or I can't go to meditation classes, or I can't do this, that, and the other. What would you recommend would be a kind of way in for people into kind of a good mindfulness practice for beginners to get them?
I would probably say one of the apps or one of the free apps to start off with. Headspace, Calm. I think do a free version. Insight Timer.
I use that.
Which I think we've talked about before that you use. Because doing a sort of 5-minute guided meditation and maybe time it for a certain time in the day. Sets a practice for you, and you're not having. I think asking somebody to sit and just concentrate on their breath for 5 minutes every day, is even just for 5 minutes is probably just quite a big ask because it takes a lot of. It takes a lot of effort to think, right, now I'm going to sit down on a cushion and think about my breathing for 5 minutes.
Especially when you've never done it before.
No,
and you're
exactly.
Like, really, is this going to make a difference?
Exactly. I think once you're an experienced meditator, you can drop into situations much more easily because we've obviously trained our brains in that way of being. But I think, start off with some simple 5-minute breathing exercises on a morning. When you get up, probably a lot of things that a lot of people, the first thing that they do is pick up their phone to check the time, turn off the alarm, check their emails,
And then you're in the
and then
loop
they're in that moment. Why not just turn on the app and do just 5 minutes?
One of the things I started doing was when I walked from my bedroom to the bathroom when I got out of bed in the morning, just use that time, just 30 seconds along there to just calm myself down. And because often when I wake up, that's when I get those negative thoughts, like, what are you doing with your life? Why are you wasting all this? Why don't you go to get a job in a bank and earn lots of money that way? But actually it's about just...
That's how you soften the volume down.
Exactly.
I think that you've just hit on a great point there. It's about finding triggers as well. So it could be, you put a note on your fridge that every time you open your fridge, you take the pause and you take 3 deep breaths. If you're boiling the kettle, I do it then. I used to be the type of person, and I still do, don't get me wrong, because I've got 2 children and a busy household, that I'll boil the kettle and then I'll run around the kitchen doing a million and one other things. But I will, from time to time, if I'm feeling that busy mind starting to crowd and overwhelm, I will make myself stand for the time that kettle boils, and I will just focus either on my breathing or listening to the kettle boil. It doesn't have to be about breathing, it could be about external noises. You can focus on, go outside. Hopefully we're going to get some nice weather soon.
It's funny, I got my wife bought me an Apple Watch for Christmas, and it comes built in with this breathe app.
Perfect.
And then throughout the day, every now and then it'll pop up.
Perfect.
And it'll just say to me, breathe, and it kind of vibrates as you take the in-breath. And then
so good
and
for you.
But it's become such a mainstream thing now that something like that used to be kind of far-fetched, alternative kind of lifestyle, but now it's even in our smartwatches.
But it just allows you to reset throughout the day, doing that, to just, I've said it a million times now, but just take that pause, just turn everything off just for a moment and just, I'm here now, whatever's going on in my mind and in my body, I'm just going to bring it back to the present and have a break from it, and also just be aware of what's going on. Because a lot of the time when we're busy, we hunched shoulders, tight jaw, maybe a headache, tummy ache, mind clattering through your 40 to 80,000 thoughts a day, and it just allows you to think, right, where am I now? What do I need now? Do I need to stop? Do I need to go and make myself a cup of tea? Am I okay? Can I carry on? Do I need to set something in my diary this week for me that is going to, this again, I don't want to start going into what sounds like woo-woo speak, but it's going to feed my soul. Something that maybe a walk in nature, or, sitting with stroking your cat for half an hour because you find that soothing. But it's all about awareness, attention, just being a lot more emotionally intelligent and emotionally aware of what's going on in there, so that you can make choices that serve you well.
Absolutely. And make a vote towards your future self, like
Absolutely.
James Clear says. Brilliant. So to wrap it up then, you run a blog and a Facebook group called My Little Place of Calm.
That's right.
So you can find it there are two on there. There's a Facebook page and a Facebook group, is that right?
I have a closed Facebook group, which is My Little Place of Calm.
So people can go on there and they can be as woo-woo as they like, without feeling judged by their friends.
Absolutely. I like to keep it private because it's a safe space for people to go, and if they want to share, they can. I'm on Instagram at My Little Place of Calm. I have a blog, which is mylittleplaceofcalm.com. I try and do ad hoc sessions around mindfulness sessions around my job, because I obviously work not obviously, but I work as well in a completely different area of life.
But you get the people in your office to have mindfulness sessions?
The people in my office do it. We sat down on Thursday and I just said I want everybody to stop, and we took 3 deep breaths and carried on.
And how do they respond? Do they go, oh God, here we go again? Or are they actually like, oh, this is useful actually?
Yeah, I think, well, you have to ask them that. Yeah. I don't know. They always say it's useful. They could be thinking, oh my God, in their heads, but I think, I know it's useful. I know, exactly. I know it's helping you. So whether you think it's helping you or not, I've sort of enforced that on them. But I have a good take up with them. When I offer to run something in work, I have a lot of support with people wanting to do it. So there obviously is something in it for them.
And you do sessions? Do you still do sessions with youngsters?
I haven't done anything so far this year.
Okay.
I'm planning. What I'd really like to do is some family sessions. I'm really sort of keen to bring mindfulness into family life rather than just teaching children. I think to have the adults in there as well, because obviously if you've got the whole family involved, then it's more likely to become part of a practice or part of a way of being, rather than the children just coming home and say, oh, Mummy, we did these breathing exercises today.
Well, it's funny, there is in some parts of the country, there is a program, a kind of mindfulness program for young primary school children. Yeah. And I saw a documentary, I think it was on Netflix, might be called Insane or something like that.
I think I've seen it.
I think that was the one. But the parents were talking about it. The children are having these kind of mindfulness sessions.
They do it in my children's school.
But they're going home and then they're telling their parents how to do it. So whereas the parents might come home from stressed out from work, the kids are saying to them, well, we do this at school, maybe you should try it too. And it's kind of filtering.
They're our future, aren't they?
Absolutely.
What did the Dalai Lama say? About if every child was taught to meditate, then
there'd be no war in like 2 generations or something.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, it's so important to, educate our children to, have that sort of emotional intelligence. But, for me, I'd like to sort of have it as the whole family understanding why they're doing it. So yes, so I am going to run some courses this year, but I do a few voluntary things as well, but I don't have a business model per se for it. I like to just talk about it and write about it and spread the benefits of it. I just know how powerful it's been for me and the journey that I've been on, and it's just important. I started the Facebook groups. It's just important for me to kind of share that. Yeah. Because otherwise I thought, well, I've kind of been through all this and, for not for nothing, because obviously it's helped me incredibly, but I just think if more people talk about it, the less stigmatized it becomes. Absolutely.
I mean, I went through it. My personal experience was the change was so profound for me, and I mean, I didn't have the terrible kind of panicking anxiety that you had. But I went through
you had your own.
Yeah, I had some dark periods on a kind of almost like regular basis, pretty much throughout my entire life, and there were kind of moments where I just didn't want to go on. And then when I started it down this course of kind of, I call it my recovery, but actually it's just, I discovered mindfulness one way or another. And it took a while, but not as long as I thought. And looking back, it seems like it's almost like a light bulb went on. And suddenly this whole idea that, we do have a say over how we feel and what we're thinking. And, it's not just about the outside world impacting on us. We're in it, we get to control who we are and what we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's very empowering. And I think that's why it became such a big theme in my first book, the whole idea about your own personal power.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
Once you're aware of that.
Well, having agency over your own thoughts is empowering, because I think a lot of people just allow their thoughts to drive them because that's where they think we are. Our thoughts are our thoughts, and we just let them go where they want to go. But
and they're us as well.
And they're part of us. Whereas with the whole mindfulness ethos, it's about being able to sort of observe and give space, and there's a slight detachment from those thoughts and back to the thoughts, not facts. And I won't go into it again.
Absolutely. So mylittleplaceofcalm.com.
Yes.
Yeah, and then on Facebook, My Little Place of Calm.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, thank you very much for that. I really enjoyed that. And
me too.
I could go on for hours in lots of different directions, but we haven't got
too.
hours. Yeah. So, but I'm so glad we finally managed to do it.
Yeah,
so thank you ever so much. Really appreciate
thank you, Chris.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. I got a lot out of that conversation. It made me think about a lot of things, particularly something I'm going to be talking about in some of my videos. I try and do a daily video, or a few times a week I publish a video on my YouTube channel. And it's this whole idea of kind of prevention rather than cure. So mindfulness and all these kind of ancient philosophies about mind, body and spirit, they tend to look at things from a kind of preventative thing. So here in the West, if you look at Western medicine, we're often talking about cure, so fighting against illness, whereas these kind of Eastern and ancient approaches talk about fighting for something. And generally in the West, we fight against stuff. So when we vote in politics, we're fighting against something. But it can be much more constructive to fight for something. So there's an idea. So don't fight against, if you're losing weight, don't fight against your flab, fight for fitness. Go to get fit. Don't go to get to change who you are. Go to get fit. And do this in all of your lives. Don't fight against your debt. Fight for more income. Don't fight against what you don't have. Fight for what you do have. Become happy with what you got. Embrace gratitude. Things like that. So anyway, a little thought for the day. It got off on a tangent, but I hope you enjoyed that podcast with me and Michelle Butler. And check out her Facebook page, My Little Place of Calm, and check out her website as well, mylittleplaceofcalm.com. All right, thanks a lot, and see you on the next one.